Hello everybody. Alrighty, so we're going to be jumping into our ball and tail animation exercise now. Alright, so we're going to be starting from scratch. I'm inside of Illustrator at the moment. Okay, so let's just go from the very beginning. File, new, and we are going to be making a 1920 by 1080. Alright, my template looks very different over here. That's because this is a not exactly legal copy of Illustrator, but that's fine. There we go, we've now got it over here, and I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so that we can see what we're working with. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is jump over to our shape layer and grab the ellipse tool. And I can click and drag. Alright, so I'm holding down shift to get my perfect circle the same way that we do in After Effects. But the nice thing about Illustrator is that by holding down Alt at the same time, I scale from the center of where I've clicked rather than dragging away from the point of click. Alright, so this is just like a little tool that I can then use. Holding down spacebar, I can move this circle around, and I'm just going to have it over here for now. Let go, and V for my selection tool, and I'm just going to select my circle. Let's make it an orange, and we're going to get rid of the stroke. Okay, and I've got a circle. I'm going to rename this layer. I double click on the layer name and I'm going to name this body. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do is using my pen tool. I am going to just quickly pen out a tail. Alright, so I'm going to click to make a point, click and drag to get this nice little curve going on. And then I'll click on that point to close it, click over here to close that shape, and I can drag it out like so. Okay, it's looking fairly symmetrical, and I now have a tail. But it's on the same layer as the body, so if I were to take this inside of After Effects, right, anything I did to the ball would happen to the tail and we wouldn't be able to animate it. So I need to put the tail onto a new layer. I can simply do that by, in my layers panel, right, we see our body over here. I can turn it on and off. Okay, if I click this little new layer button, I get layer 2. I select my tail and I get this little blue square. This blue square, if I hit the drop down, represents the tail. And I can drag that square and drop it onto layer 2. And I can rename this as tail. Now, tail is on a separate layer. Alrighty. Ball looks a little bit big, so I'm just going to hold down shift and rescale the tail so that this is a very bushy-tailed fox that we're working with. Alright, in my mind this is a fox. Okay. Then I'm going to hit Control Shift or Command Shift S to bring up my save option. I'm going to call this ball and tail 2 because this is the second time I'm doing this, because audio sometimes likes to not work with us. I've now saved it. I'm done inside of Illustrator. I'll keep it open, alright, but we're not going to be making any changes. I'm just going to minimize it. I'm going to jump back into After Effects and you can see that I've just finished our ball and tail animation exercise. Alrighty, in my project panel I'm going to double click, alternatively File, Import File, and I'm going to navigate to my Illustrator layer, ball and tail 2. Alright, so I've selected it, and I want to make sure that my import as option is set to composition, retain layer sizes. Very important. I click that, I say import, and it's done. We now have a composition, right? It's already done for us. I can just double click this and I'm inside of my comp. Okay, nice and easy. I've got my tail layer and I've got my body layer. Boom. Alrighty, so it's very big, alright, and I don't want to worry about sort of getting the scaling issues wrong, so I'm just going to parent the tail to the body, and I'm going to right click, new null object, and I'm going to parent the body to the null, and I'm just going to hit S to bring out the scale, and I'm going to scale down my null. Now, notice that as I scale up and down my null, it does not affect the scale of my tail. Right, it rhymes. Boom, I'm a poet of my age. It's been a long day, I apologize. Okay, so we're just going to make it a little bit more manageable. We want a smaller character so it can really jump in this space. And once we've got that, I'm going to then delete that null because we don't need it. I'm going to drag down reference using my rulers for a floor guide. Alright, and then I'm going to move my body. Okay, now the body still needs to be able to squash and stretch. Okay, so if I quickly unparent my tail from my body, hitting Y or manually selecting my pan behind tool, I'm going to move that anchor point to the bottom. Okay, we still need to be able to have this squash and stretch taking place. For whatever reason, now all of a sudden my scale values have changed. I don't know why that's the case. Probably because we deleted the null object. Okay, quickly check. So undo all this when I keep this null object, and then I move my body. So if I just sort of turn off the null object, okay, so the scales are going to stay at 100, and I'm going to leave it there. We don't need it. I'm just going to lock it. Move my body, make a guide for the floor, body can snap to that, Y, drag it down to the bottom, there we go. Alrighty, unparent the tail from the body so that my scale can be affected from the floor. Okay, now we're going to hide the tail. Okay, we're not working with the tail. We need to get the animation right for the body first, okay? Because this is the driving force. This is what is moving or propelling the tail. So it makes sense that we get this animation correct first, and then we have our tail react to what we animate from there. Alrighty, so I'm going to select the body layer. I'm going to hit P to bring up my position, and I'm going to make a keyframe at the very beginning. Okay, now this is a little bit different from our ball bounce. We're not starting from the top anymore. Okay, we're starting from here at the bottom, and then at about 1 second it's going to jump upwards. Okay, this is jumping very high. It's a super energetic fox, and at 2 seconds it's going to hit the ground again. Alright, and thanks to our layer and that view snap to guides is on, it automatically snapped to the floor for us, so we don't have to worry about it sinking into the ground. I'm then going to select my convert vertex tool, and I'm going to remove the curves. Okay, I do this initially so that I can make sure that the top of my arc is in the middle. Alrighty, and then I can add the correct arc that I want to that. Clicking and dragging out to get these arms. That's looking about right, so I'll just let it go there. V for my selection tool, and now we can just play that back. Boom, boom. Alrighty, so the nice thing about having kept this null object is that at the end of this animation I can always just recenter this slightly more to the right. You'll see that it starts quite far to the left and it ends closer to the middle than it does to the right. So we'll fix that towards the end. Okay, so we've got our initial bounce, but we now need to remember that we need a little bit of anticipation happening at the beginning. Okay, we don't just want this character jumping into midair for no reason. We kind of want this to emulate, for example, a cat getting ready to pounce on something. So we need a little bit of squash and stretch happening at the beginning, get a little bit of time for the tail to do something, and then we jump. Alrighty, so I'm going to select all these keyframes, and I think I'm going to move out by about 15 frames. So shift page down, or command shift right arrow key for you Mac trolls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 15 frames, and I'm just going to drag this keyframe out over here. Right, why have I done this? Because now I can jump 10 frames back, and I can just make a dead key by sort of just clicking on this little empty diamond over here. Boom, it makes a key for me. I've got 5 frames of nothing happening. It gives our viewers time to see that this is where we should be looking. Then I've got 10 frames for the anticipation. This is where the squash and stretch is going to take place, and then the jump takes place. Alright, so this I'm just going to tell hold, right? That's just acting as a reference for now. And I can select these keys, hit F9, or right click, keyframe assist, easy ease. I'm going to hit N at 3 seconds, right, so that we don't have this dead space at the end. Remembering that there is still going to be a little bit of anticipation or reaction at the end, so perhaps I can drag this out to 4 seconds. And then trim comp to work area. So if I play this back, this ball jumps into there, hangs for far too long, and then lands on the ground. Now it's taking far too long for this jump to happen. Okay, so I think about 20 frames should be about right. So shift page down twice to jump 20 frames, shift that key up, and then maybe it's going to take as long to hit the ground. So 20 frames out, it hits the ground over here. That's feeling about right for now. Okay. We obviously need to jump into our graph editor then, so that we can get the timing of this right. Now, we've got our anticipation happening, and then this creature is going to shoot into the air. And the anticipation, is a very important aspect to add, because it helps prepare us for the sudden propulsion that is about to take place. Okay, so if we were to ignore the anticipation, Notice how that's a very jarring experience. From nothing to that in a very short amount of time, right? It can be used as shock value, right? So there's definitely a place for using this, but we kind of want to give our viewers a little bit of a warning that something's coming. Alright, then we get to this area, and again we've got that dreadful hang, so I'm just going to drag this up a little bit so that there is a little bit of motion still happening. Alright, that's feeling pretty good. Boom, boom. Alrighty, and then we want a little hop, skip, and a jump at the end. Alright, so I know that some of you sort of added a lot of bounces, but I kind of just want one little bounce to show that this creature is sort of allowing itself to dissipate that energy. So it hits the ground over here. Okay, and then I'm just going to drag out to 3 seconds for now. I want it to sort of jump into the air a little bit. Okay, we could have it jumping straight up. I'm going to have it jumping a little bit forward in this example, just because I haven't done an example like this yet. Hits the ground again. Convert vertex tool. Add a little bit of an arc to that. This is going to be a very sort of short little jump. Okay, so I've even maybe moved this key a little bit too high. Let's have it slightly off the ground like so. Jumps into the air, so if this took 20 frames, then maybe this would only take 10 and 10, just to show that it's also taking less time and energy to do. Jumping back into the graph editor, let's think about this. So it hits the ground, it's going to leave the ground with a little bit of force as well, so we're going to drag this way, we're going to drag that way, and we're going to move this up as well, so that it's not just stuck in mid-air. Alright, so then if I play that back, we get the jump and the little bounce at the end, and that's hanging for a little bit too long. I don't want to play too much with the graph editor in this one, so instead I'm just going to shift these up. Instead of taking 10 frames, let's just make it 5. So remember to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll see how that works. It's not working that great actually, so maybe just 8 and 8. That's not looking right. 10, 1, 2, okay, and then 10, 1, 2. All right, that's looking a bit better. Okay, back into the graph editor. Let's just make sure that we've actually got it working correctly. Drag this out, drag this over here maybe. And there we go. Okay, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but there are cats fighting outside my window. Apologize if you can hear it. Alright, so that's looking about right. I can now say that my first layer of this lasagna is done. Alright. I've just made myself really hungry for lasagna. So I've done my initial movement. Okay, I've got the position down and the timing down. Now I need to add my squash and stretch, right? Because that is the next important thing. So I'm going to use this little keyframe that I made here as reference, selecting my body, holding Shift and S to bring up the scale. I'm going to make a keyframe, right click, toggle hold so I can block it out. It's a perfect circle at this point. Then when we get here, I know that I want my character to have squashed itself down a little bit. Okay, so I'll drag this out, maybe make this like 110. I added 10 to the width, so I need to subtract it from the height, make that 90. Okay, so it's getting ready for that jump. Jumps into mid-air. And over here it needs to be a perfect circle, so I'm just going to copy paste my perfect circle keyframe. It's going to hit the ground. Now it has fallen from a bit of a height, right? So we might then understand that this squash and stretch might be a little bit more intense, so maybe 115 and 85. Okay, perfect circle at the top of this little bounce, and then squash when it hits the ground. Okay. Subtle squash, so maybe like 105 and 95, and then 1, 2, 3, a perfect circle again. Alrighty, so we've got those keys. I'm going to add easing to them by hitting F9, and we're going to just scrub through this. So we've got this little squash taking place. Boom, this character then jumps. Alright, so we want our stretch to then occur as it leaves the ground, so maybe 2 frames or 3 frames later. We'll see now 1, 2. I'm just going to copy paste this keyframe. We're going to swap the values around so it's 90, 110. Remember, we are doing this now because we want it to look as though it's stretching out as it's shooting away from the ground. Boom. Turn it into a perfect circle. Before it hits the ground, right, we don't want it to squash just yet, so 2 frames beforehand, I'm just going to copy paste this keyframe. It's stretched itself out, hits the ground. We've got a little hop, skip, and a jump happening over here, so we might have a little bit of stretch. Okay, not nearly as much though. So this might just be 95 and 105 over here, just to sell the idea that it is in fact stretching. Perfect circle. And then we're not going to add stretch there because it's not falling fast enough to have stretch. We're just going to play with the easing of our graph editor there. So, speaking of the dreaded graph editor, I'm going to jump in here. Let's take a look. This sort of initial anticipation is something that I might come back to play with a little bit later. Alright, but for now, I think this kind of makes sense actually. This character is sort of sinking into a pounce and it's easing itself there. So maybe we could have the motion take place a little bit sooner. So this is all the idea that it's settling down and getting ready. The energy is being contained and is fighting to be released, and then it jumps. Boom. Alright, that jump over there I think we can leave. But again, what we did with the bouncing ball animation, we want most of our change to take place over here. Right? This is where the most speed is occurring. We're dissipating our energy as we get up here. And we don't want to get the idea that the ball is only sort of becoming a perfect circle as it gets to the top, right? We sort of want it to be getting closer to a perfect circle by about here. And we translate that by simply dragging out these dots. I'm going to take it all the way to the right as far as I can. My timeline. Okay, so we could probably stand to shift this up a little bit as well. Okay, there we go. Most of that change is happening. It's easing into a perfect circle up there. And now we need the opposite to take place on this side, right? So we'll just drag this in this direction, like so. And maybe drag these a little bit more out this way. Okay. So when I scrub through, we can see that it's not transforming too soon. Right, then it hits the ground. Bam! Slams down into the ground. Off the ground. If I zoom in here, try and remember what I've told it to do. So it's gone from squashed, then it is up into the air and it is stretched, and then it's becoming a perfect circle. It's kind of working at the moment, but this is a game of inches, ladies and gentlemen. We need to sweat the small stuff as motion designers, so we're just going to add a little bit of easing there so that it occurs sooner. It eases into that perfect circle, and then as we move away from that, we want that sort of squash, because we haven't added a stretch key here. Remember, if I undo this quickly, it squashes down to hit the floor, so this only happens when it hits the ground. It makes sense then that we shift our keys to be flush with the wall there, and we tell it that it's only gonna change once it hits the ground. Boom. Alright, and we get that nice little pop on the end. So that's looking pretty good. So this is effectively what we have done, is we've just recreated the bouncing ball exercise. Alright, it's looking pretty good. I'm fairly happy with that for now. Now we can jump into the tail animation. Alright, now the tail animation is something that confused a lot of people, because we started using the puppet pin tool, right? And this is a difficult tool, right? It's something that we seldom use, right? Because it can be quite difficult. So don't sort of be too afraid of it, but let's see what we can do. So we're going to turn the tail back on. I'm just going to deselect my puppet pin tool for now so that I can actually see what I'm doing. Select my tail, and we're going to move the anchor point for the tail, because we do sort of want to have the option of adding rotation, and we don't want the rotation to sort of happen in the middle of the tail, right? Tail obviously rotates from the root, so I'm just going to move the anchor point to where the root of that tail would be. Now, If we parent the tail to the body, right, the squash and stretch of that body affects the tail. Now, this is something that we can get away with. I'm not going to penalize you for this. Okay. If we are doing our animation with the puppet pin tool correctly, we shouldn't really notice that squash and stretch. However, for the perfectionists out there, and there is no bashing happening, I'm a fan of the perfectionists, what we want to do is we want to tell this sort of tail that it needs to, its position is the only thing that should be affected when parented to the body. Alright, so how do we do that? We jump into expressions again, and this is something that terrified a lot of my Monday class. I'm going to hit P to bring up my position on my tail. I'm going to hold down Alt, right, the Alt button, and I'm going to click on the little stopwatch over here. And then this opens my expression option, right? We don't have to type anything in. Thankfully, there's no coding involved in this. We get this little pick whip tool over here. We're going to click it, and we're going to drag it to the position over here. Now, when I let go, and then I click away, it's going to change where my tail, for some reason my tail's disappeared all the way over here, right? But you can see that it is, in fact, moving along with the body. So we just need to fix the position now. We need to tell it that even though the position of the tail is being affected by the body, it shouldn't be all the way out here. We do that by changing the position of the anchor point. So I can just hold down Shift and sort of drag this number up over here, because you'll notice that when I move, try and move the position of the tail, it doesn't do anything. Right, it's locked in place to the body. So I just need to shift the anchor point. You'll notice that the anchor point's not moving, but the body of the tail is. Okay, and that just means that my anchor point is locked to the position of this ball. So by telling it that the anchor point needs to reference the tail body in a different space, we can move the tail back in place. And now, oh dear, that's not looking too great. Alrighty, so I have figured it out for whatever reason in After Effects. Because we jumped straight into the ball and tail comp that After Effects made for us, when I parent specifically the position of the tail to the position of my ball, it throws it all the way out here for some reason. Okay, so instead, I'm going to select my layers quickly so that we don't lose the animation that we've done. Hit Control C to copy those layers, Control N to make a new composition. Say OK, and we're just going to paste those layers in here. Right, now you'll notice that the animation is exactly the same. There's no difference to what we've done. But when I hit position to bring up the position value for the body so we can see those keys, in fact I'm going to reselect the layer and hit U so that I bring up my position and scale. I then grab my tail over here, and when I hit P, Alt click on the P position, and then I parent this to position over here. Click away. You'll notice that for whatever reason, it no longer jumps as far away. Okay, and this means that our animation is not going to break. Okay, so bringing up the anchor point by hitting A, I am then going to just adjust where this tail should be. Like so. Okay, now when I play my animation, boom, my tail follows along to the body without squashing and stretching, you'll notice. Okay. So, now I need to add my puppet pin tool so that this entire animation culminates in a nice little swishing action. Okay, so first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select my tail, and I'm going to select my puppet pin tool. Alright, I've got show mesh on. I'm just going to turn that off for now. I'm going to place a pin at the root. Okay, we get a little yellow dot over there, which we can see. I'm going to place one in sort of the middle of the bulge, or the middle of the tail rather, so about here, and then one on the tip. Okay, we only want 3 for these objects, and that's because if we have more than that, we start getting weird little aberrations when we change it. But for now, this will allow for some nice little swishing animation. Okay. So I am going to just collapse the ball layer. I'm going to lock it so that I can't change anything. Reselect tail and the tail layer. Hit U so that I can see the keyframes that I've just placed on it. Alrighty. And I am then going to just sort of select one of these keys, and I'm going to turn, when I have my puppet pin tool selected, I'm going to turn the mesh back on. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so this mesh is just a visual indicator of all these different little triangles that we're working with, and these triangles would allow us to deform this shape. Currently, my expansion is set to 12. I think that the generic setting is 10. If I were to take this down to 1, for example, we can see that it is sitting just on the outline. The expansion is how far the triangles move beyond the actual outline of the shape. So when I sort of animate this, it's looking pretty good, but I find that sort of having the expansion out just a little bit helps to smooth out a little sort of our shape. So if I were to pull it a little bit too far, then at least it's not going to crimp over here, for example. Alrighty. Then we've got the number of triangles. Now in my version of After Effects, I can add as many triangles as I want. I believe I can take it up to 1,000, and it will then try to do that, and hopefully my PC is not going to crash. Okay, but we could take this down to 10, and if we have this to 10, you're going to see that this is not going to look too great, right? It's looking pretty shitty at the moment. Notice how wherever these lines meet, we're getting some horrible little effects going on. But as soon as I take this back up to like 500, I get a nice curve going on. Okay, so if you're having little crimping issues or sort of like little geometric issues, then that is the way to do it. I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo. Please undo. Doesn't want to undo. So I'm just going to have to reset this to where I thought it was, around about here, and set this back to 500. Okay, I now have my tail and I've got my keys. Alrighty. And we're going to think about this. Okay, so I am going to bring up my keys for my position and scale on the body, just so I can use those as a guide, and we can see that this is where our anticipation is happening. Alright, we've got our body squashing down, getting ready to pounce, and I've already set my keys for a normal looking tail at rest at the beginning. Okay, so I am going to drag out to where we are in our position for that nice little anticipation, and I'm just going to adjust my keys a little bit, and I'm going to have my tail drag upwards, kind of like this. Okay, now I know that when a cat sort of gets ready to pounce, it's more flicking its tail from side to side, but the reason why I'm doing this upward motion during the anticipation is that when our body shoots away, we can then have this tail snap down. Boom, it's snapping like so. And that snap into a sudden opposite position sells the idea that in fact the body is dragging the tail back. Right, the body is dragging the tail down, and in fact this tip would actually kind of be something like that instead. Now, something to keep in mind with the puppet pin, it is very easy to lose our sense of proportion. Alright, it's a mistake that we all make. It's very easy to stretch this out of position. Alright, so we do need to keep that in mind as we go. So we've got a nice little anticipation happening, and then we slam downwards. So this would kind of be like so, I think. Okay, now notice that for these points, when I have this option on, right, I think we have to have this on in CC in order to see our path, we do still have an option to add curves. Right, and this is very important, especially for the tip of the tail, because what happens is it can suck in on itself, and we lose the idea of an actual swish taking place. So with the Convert Vertex tool, I'm just going to click and drag, and I'm going to add an outward stretch so that my tip, right, don't take that out of context, the tip of my tail rather moves away from the body. It doesn't suck in on itself. We don't lose that volume. We still get that nice sort of swishing motion. Okay, so what's happening next? Right, we've got the anticipation taking place. It then sort of shoots away, and the next time that this tail might change is over here. Right, and this is where the tail's sort of caught up to the body. So I'm just going to copy paste these keyframes simply because then I have something to work with. Zoom in, and let's then adjust. So I'm going to drag this up here. I think that this tail might sort of react to catching up with the body. Might sort of flop over a little bit. like so. This curve is looking a little strange, and then this is actually a very cool point. So if I were to try and change this arm, notice how it's also affecting this. Okay, and that's because I'm using my selection tool. But with the convert vertex tool, I can make a change to that arm without affecting the previous position. Okay, and that makes life a little bit easier. So if you're having constant trouble with your paths, convert vertex tool, as you can see here, can break it sometimes, but for the most part it is your friend. Sorry, I hit the wrong key there. Okay, so it is now shooting upwards, and it is now sort of taking place over here. We can play with our graph editor so we get our timing right, but for now it is then going to start falling. And as it falls, it's going to then eventually hit the ground, and when it hits the ground, this is where we're going to offset our flap. So I think that I could add a couple of keys maybe about here. Let's copy paste these, and I just want to sort of change the position of that curve so that we're getting the idea that a change has taken place. Okay, it's not sitting in the right place at the moment, but we are going to play with our rotation in a moment, which might help us. Okay, select my convert vertex tool, just make sure that we're constantly working with arcs for the tip of the tail at least. I could probably stand to do a little bit of arc work for this one as well, but for now I think that this is working. It then hits the ground. Okay, and as it hits the ground, the tail is going to react to that sudden change. So what I want to do is I'm just going to copy paste these keyframes here so that I've got them. While this ball is bouncing upwards, I then want to give the idea that the tail is reacting to that sudden change of direction. Okay, so I'm just going to select these, play with the curve, so that it is constantly moving away from the body, and then as it's falling it's going to rise back up, so I can copy paste these keyframes just to help get that idea. Maybe I'll have it going in this direction just to try and sell that. Please don't crash, thank you. Okay, and then it's going to settle and come back down to be on the ground at rest. Okay, and I'm just going to quickly get that arc out again. Alright, so this end piece is arguably the most difficult. Alright, and this is where we need to spend most of our time doing the refinement. So naturally we're going to procrastinate, we're going to do it last. I want to go back to the beginning of my animation, and I kind of just want to play through and see. I could probably exaggerate that a little bit more. Right, it jumps upwards, and we're sort of just going to end our animation here for now, so we can sort of just focus here at the beginning. So I'm going to select my layer, hit Shift R to bring up the rotation as well, make a keyframe. While that's taking place, let's just push it slightly in this direction. Right. Snap takes place, we'll push it in the opposite direction, so it kind of looks like it's being dragged. We want to make sure that it's still connected to the body though. So we can then shift this keyframe in, just to make sure it's still attached. Okay, and maybe what's happening here, because it's kind of not looking too correct, maybe it would look a little bit more if we had the arc going in this direction. That. So it builds up. Maybe I can swap this around so that this is actually up here, like this. This is getting ready. Boom. Snaps. Okay, but there we see that the tip sort of moving in on itself, so we just need to make sure that that moves away from the body. Alright, always moving away from the body. Boom. That gives us the nice idea of the tail snapping, and you can see that I was under the complete wrong, or not wrong, but I had like a completely different idea, and there's nothing wrong with blocking out our animation, going back and making changes to try and sell the visual idea of the motion. So that's then moving. As it's getting up here, our rotation is now in the wrong place again, so I'm just going to reset this to 0 so we can see what this should be doing. It comes up think that's kind of looking right. Maybe we should push this maybe just a little bit more. I don't want it to be stuck too much into the body. So there, and then I think maybe we can just push, sorry, let's just select these keys and we can just reposition the keys. Right, so that's going to affect the animation. Then, cool, that's taking place, and we'll focus on that last bit at the end there. Alrighty, so focusing on the last bit over here. Sorry, I need to get some tea there, my throat is dying. Alright, so this is looking fairly okay for now. We need to add some rotation to the body, but we'll get there. For now, we need to just ease out this little rotation here. So this is looking wrong. Okay, this tail movement at the very end here is looking quite incorrect. As the body's moving upwards, this tail would be rotating up. Okay, so what we actually need this to be doing is it slams into the ground, it moves down, so maybe this should be happening a little bit sooner, and then by the time it gets here, it's raised up again, so it's kind of up here, like so. That would actually take place as it begins to fall, so boom. Okay, something strange happening there. We really don't want to overcomplicate it if we can help it. Okay, so that rotation is happening there, that's happening there, and as it's falling down, maybe we're just sort of changing that position a little bit, just so that we've got a bit of a change between there, and then it comes down. Right, I think that's kind of looking quite right. So we've added a couple of keys, just to get the idea of that little motion taking place there. Alright, so hopefully we play that back and we get the idea of a tail reacting. Okay, it's a little extreme at the end. Here, this is moving a little bit too much. So let's just turn that down a little bit. Maybe adding a little bit of rotation. Actually no, because we're going to be adding rotation to the body. So let's take a look at that section over there. And for now, that's kind of working for me. I can always go back and refine it later. So I'm just going to add easing, because easing makes life beautiful. Right, and that's added a little bit. But there's one thing that's missing, right? The idea that this body is not rotating as it's moving upwards. We're not getting that idea, and it's kind of breaking the illusion for us. Alrighty. So what I can do, the same way that I sort of had my tail position parented to just the position of the ball, I can also parent the rotation of my tail to the rotation of the ball. So maybe the little rotations that I've done aren't necessarily adding as much as they should. I don't want to lose the work I've done, so I'm going to select the rotation keyframes, Control X or Command X to cut them. Alright, that way I can always paste them back. Right, I haven't lost them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring up some keys for my rotation for the ball. I'm going to hide, well actually I need the tail so I can actually see, because otherwise we won't see the rotation of the ball. I'm going to alt-click rotation for the ball, and I'm just going to parent that rotation for the ball to the rotation, of the tail to the rotation of the ball. Now, when I rotate the body, the tail rotates as well. Okay, and that's actually what we're going to be doing. So, if I take a look at this, we've got this nice little anticipation happening, but then as it's jumping, could probably then stand to just drag that key up over there, and while this is jumping, let's tilt it back a little bit. Maybe minus 20 is a bit extreme, maybe minus 15, just to give the sense that the tip of the nose of this creature is actually pointing in the direction that it's flying. Alright, then we get to the top of the arc. Alright, so by here it needs to be at 0 again, right? So it's sort of evened itself out. Just before it hits the ground, we could have this at positive 15, so it's actually pointing downwards. In 2 frames, we're going to copy paste the rotation where it's normal again. And then on the end, I don't think we need rotation here. This is the idea of just like this little thing just going boing forward just to dissipate that energy. So we're going to add some easing to this rotation, and we are going to jump into its graph editor. And we're going to take a look at what we can do. So most of the rotation is going to take place at the beginning, right? It's the same sort of timing as we've got on the scale, so we're just going to push this out over here. Okay, so most of that rotation takes place there, In fact, maybe more in the middle. Like so. Maybe we can get away with a little bit of a snap motion going on. Oh, that's not looking too bad. Playing around with it, seeing what it does. And the same sort of thing is happening here, but it might happen a little bit sooner. Let's see what happens. No, it's going to happen later. That's what it's going to do. No, I'm wrong. It's back this way. Okay, so it's going to sort of then very quickly rotate down, correct itself, and bounce. And by adding this little finesse, we help sell this ball and tail idea. Okay, so I could probably still do a little bit of work on the tail at the end. But for now, I think it's looking okay. I think the confusing thing is that when this rotation happens, we need the tip of the tail to actually be lower than the center of the tail. Kind of need it to be over here about. So if I just play with that, maybe that looks a little better. So it hits the ground, it flaps. A little bit too extreme. I'm losing my volume, so I'm just going to quickly adjust that. It flaps. And then we get that. And I think then we've got the refinement down. There we go. Okay, so that's looking a lot better. Again, however, we've got our little fox jumping through the void. It's a little scary, right? We don't necessarily want that. At the same time, we also don't want, if we sort of turn on our tile action safe, we don't want most of the animation to be happening on the left-hand side of the screen. Okay, so we did copy and paste our layers into a new composition. Alright, so I just need to right click, new, null object, and because the tail is technically not parented to the ball, right, only its position and rotation are, we can parent both of these to the null, and we can just shift them up a little bit. Using the null, it's not going to break our animation. And that helps to sort of sell it a little bit more. That looks a little bit more visually sort of interesting. Alright, and then we can add a background and a floor, because we obviously want this little fox to exist within a stage. We don't want it to just be in space. So, Control Y to bring up solid. Alright, so that's the shortcut to add a solid. Alternatively, we could go layer, new, solid. Alright, but we need to start using our shortcuts. Control Y. I'm going to use the dark blue again. Drag that layer to the bottom. Alright, this blue is kind of complementing our fox, so I think it's working quite well. And then I will duplicate it, Control Shift Y to bring up the new solids color settings. And let's make this one lighter. Actually, no, a little bit darker, even darker. There we go. Dark is good. And we're just going to then shift that down, put it into a believable floor position. A little bit of overlap might be nice. And now I have a fox jumping in an actual scene. And even though that scene is very simple, it adds to the entire aesthetic appeal, and there's a couple of extra marks involved. Alrighty. Now, for the sound of this, okay, I have quickly downloaded for you guys. I'll make it available. Alright, so if I can find it, free transition sound effects. This is what we're going to be using for our swishing sound. And we're going to be using the actual ball bounce sound for the contact again. Alrighty, so I want to double click on this, and you'll notice that we sort of solo it now. We've soloed this footage, and I can scrub through this and I can play it and listen to all the different sounds. Okay, try and find one that might work for our little fox. Definitely not. It could be comical to have a little ping pong ball at the end. So I am then going to use this little in point to cut that there, and I'll just set an out point on the end. And then to get this into my composition, I am going to just hit ripple insert, and that drags that little section down for me. I can drag that to the bottom, hit LL. And we don't need that many bounces, right? So I'm just going to hit Alt, open square bracket to cut that, Alt, close square bracket to cut that. I'm going to turn the visual off so we don't see that horrible little ball in the background. Okay. Oh, it looks like the ripple has broken our little background here, so I'm just going to quickly drag those back. Okay, so we're going to have a swish over here. It doesn't make sense for a contact sound to be made as the ball leaves, but it does make sense over here. So I'm just going to drag this layer out over here. So let's take a look at that. Yeah. We could make this a little bit softer. Okay, so it's not as harsh, so maybe just like a -10. Okay, and then it comes into contact one more time at the end over here. So Control D, LL so I can see it. Drag it over here. Let's just zoom in. Does that work? Not really. One frame later. Okay, and then this one we can have at maybe like -20, because it's a very soft landing. Alrighty, so we've now got our little bouncing ball sound, and already that's going to add something to it. Alright, the next thing that we want to do is this free transition audio that I'm going to give you. That is loud. Wow. Okay, so I am just going to find a way to affect it. Can't do it that way. I apologize. So instead of doing it this way, we're going to bring it in down here, and we're going to drag our master volume down so it's a lot softer. Okay, I'm just going to mute our bounces so we don't have those. Control K to bring up our options. This audio is about 2 minutes long, so I'll just add that, and now I can jump into my waveforms. Let's see where the swish that I want to use is. Let's get past the intro of that video. We're going to have to drag out our workspace so that we can actually have the entire audio in our view. Just going to end it there. We'll trim our workspace here, and here we're starting to see our little swishes. Okay, so let's see what we've got. A bit too slow. Nope. Nah, that could work. That's a bit too violent. Also a little bit too violent. We kind of want to just try and find a swish that matches the motion, right? It's not a very fast motion. That might work. Yeah. I think this could work. So I'm just going to hit Alt, close square bracket, open square bracket, Alt, close square bracket, and we are going to drag this layer back here. Our animation ends on the 4-second mark. Trim comp, and now we can take a look and see where does our swishes take place. It starts over here, so we can have this here. Alright, that works quite well. And then over here we've got an impact sound, and that impact forces a very forceful swish. So I think we can duplicate this audio, LL, drag it out over here. Okay. And then on the very end as well, we've got one final swish taking place that's sort of really noticeable, but that swish is going to be quite soft. Okay, so we're going to bring this down to about -35. And it's just a whisper, it's just a hint of a sound. Turn on our ball bouncers again. Okay. Okay, so I'm definitely not putting a lot of effort into the audio mixing in this. We could definitely refine this a lot further, but I think that for now we get the point. Right, so we've done our ball bounce. Okay, so essentially we've just re-practiced our bouncing ball animation. And then we added our tail, right? They're Illustrator files that we brought in. We copied those layers into a new composition so that we didn't get that weird sort of position glitch when we linked our position of our tail to the position of our ball. Alright, so if I bring up my position, we sort of alt-clicked to bring up the expression, we parented that to the position of the body, and then we used the puppet pin tool to add some flair to that tail so we could get the actual swish going. So hopefully that has covered our questions over that. Alright? Then in the next video, we'll be covering the walk cycle. Alright, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.